Okay, so the next topic is on epiphytes. Okay, what now? Before we come to the ecological adaptations of epiphytes, let us try to understand what are epiphytic plants. Now, epiphytes, as you can see here, epi, it means above, then phyton, it means plant. So, from the name epiphytes, that means plants growing upon plants. Okay, so epiphytes are those autotrophic plants which grow on the surface of some other supporting plants, and these plants, they are not permanently rooted in the soil. Okay, so these are some of the examples: orchids, then palm tree, then some algae, lichens and mosses. These are some of the best examples of epiphytic plants. So epiphytes are those plants which grow on upon other plants. But remember one thing, that these epiphytes, they do not depend on their support. Okay, they do not depend on the supporting plants on which they are growing. In fact, they make their own food. So these plants, they absorb sufficient moisture from the atmosphere, and also mineral nutrients they absorb from the decaying bark of the supporting trees on which they are growing, they are situated. Okay, so they either obtain the mineral nutrients from the decaying bark of the supporting plants, or from they absorb sufficient moisture from the atmosphere. So they do not depend on the supporting plants on which they are growing. And these plants, as they are autotrophic in nutrition, they manufacture their own food. Okay, remember this, that they manufacture their own food from water and carbon dioxide in the presence of sunlight. So just like other plants, they synthesize their own food, and they do not depend on the supporting plant. That is why these plants, they are different from the parasites, because we know that parasitic plants are those plants which depend on the plants in which they are growing, because parasites also, just like epiphytes, they grow upon other plants. But these parasites, they derive nutrients and water from the living parts of the supporting plants. But these epiphyte, remember, they make their own food. Okay, so they are different from parasite in that way. And also they differ from lianas, that is the woody stem climbers. Okay, so these woody stem climbers also, they are not epiphytes. They are different from epiphytes, because epiphytes, in the real sense of term, they are not permanently rooted in the soil. While these woody stem climbers, they are climbers, they grow upon other plants, but their roots is actually, they are actually rooted to the soil. But you see, epiphytes, they are not permanently rooted in the soil. Okay, so that is why these epiphytes, they differ from parasites, because they make their own food, and they are different from the woody stem climbers as well, because they are not rooted in the soil. And these epiphytes, they are also referred to as the aerophytes or air plants. Why? Because you will find that, for example, orchids, you must have seen orchids, how they are growing on other plants, and their roots, they are not rooted in the soil. Okay, their roots are hanging, and in that way the roots, they obtain the moisture, or they absorb the moisture from the air. So since they are not rooted in the soil, so these type of plants, that is the epiphytic plants, they are also referred to as the aerophytes or the air plants. Now coming to the important features, that is here I want to discuss about the adaptations. Okay, the ecological adaptations of the epiphytic plants. Now, since the epiphytes, they depend directly for the water supply on rains, then atmospheric moisture, snow and dew, because we know that they don't have the roots which are similar to the other plants. Okay, which grow on the soil. We know that those plants that are growing in the soil, they can absorb the water from the soil through the roots. But these epiphytes, since they are not rooted to the soil, so they develop certain structural adaptations for water storage as well as for reducing excessive water loss. Okay, so they develop certain structural adaptations, and these structural adaptations, the first type of adaptation, that is morphological adaptation. The first type is the roots. Now, the root system of the epiphyte in the epiphytic vascular plants, the root system is extensively developed. And in this case, the root may be of the following three types. So let us take a look at the three types of roots present in the epiphytic plants. Now, you can see, for example, here you can see in this figure clearly the three types of roots are the aerial roots, then the clinging roots, and the pseudobulbs. Okay, so let us study one by one. Now, the first one, that is the normal absorbing roots. These roots, okay, they help to absorb water, minerals, and organic nutrients from the moist crevices of decaying barks of the supporting plants. Okay, so they are normal absorbing roots or the aerial roots. Since they are attached, you can see these aerial roots here, they are attached to the bark of a tree. So in this way, they help to absorb water, minerals, as well as organic nutrients from the decaying bark of the supporting plant, whether it's a plant or it's a tree. Okay, so this is the function of the aerial roots. Now the next one, that is the clinging roots. As you can see here, the second type of roots here, they are hanging just like that. Okay, so these are referred to as the clinging roots. Now these clinging roots, they fix the epiphytes on the surface of the supporting object firmly, but also they absorb the nutrients from the humus and dust that are accumulated on the surface of the bark. Okay, so their function is to absorb nutrients from the humus and dust that are present on the surface of the bark of the supporting plant. And we have the aerial roots. Now we have the aerial roots. So the aerial roots here, they are spongy and green roots which hang downwardly in the atmosphere, and these roots, they absorb moisture from the air. Okay, because they are just hanging. Sorry, here I made a mistake just now. Just take a look at these clinging roots. Actually, the clinging roots, they help to attach firmly to the supporting plant. Okay, it is the aerial roots which are hanging freely on the air. Okay, they are hanging freely. As you can see here, these are the aerial roots. So for attachment, the function of the clinging roots is for attachment, for attaching the plant, the epiphyte, firmly to the supporting plant, and also not only help in attachment but also in absorption of nutrients. Even the normal roots, they help in absorption of nutrients and moisture, water from the supporting plant. But the aerial roots here, these aerial roots, as you can see, that they help in the absorption of moisture, not from the bark of the supporting plant but from the air. Okay, from the air. These roots, they can photosynthesize in light because of the presence of the green color in them. So these aerial roots, they are usually green in color because they contain photosynthetic pigments. They can do photosynthesis, and in some epiphytes, the roots collect on their surface a good amount of dust, and that dust, it helped to hold water, okay, which will finally be absorbed by the roots. So these aerial roots, they can also collect a good amount of dust in them so that they can hold more amount of water, and this water, it can then be finally absorbed by the roots. So these type of roots can be seen in the epiphytic plants. Okay, next is the stem. Now, the stem in epiphytic vascular plants, they may or may not be extensively developed. And some epiphytes, they develop succulents in their stems. Okay, so the stem, it becomes pseudo bulbous or tuberous. Okay, I hope you understand those uh stem which has become tuberous, just like this one. You can see here a pseudo bulb. Okay, it's like a bulb. Okay, just like an onion bulb, or tuberous, just like what to say, in you have seen in the ginger or turmeric. Okay, that tuberous root. Okay, so the stem, it is usually just like in the form of a pseudobulb or a or tuberous. Okay, so these but this occur only in some epiphytic plants. Okay, they develop succulence or fleshiness in their stems, and they become pseudo bulbous or they become tuberous. But stem in most of the epiphytic vascular plants, they may or may not be extensively developed. Okay, now coming to the leaves. Now the majority of epiphytes, they show considerable reduction in leaf number. Okay, so the number of leaves in epiphytes is considerably low as compared to other plants. Some orchids, they develop only a single leaf in a growing season. So just imagine, as compared to other plants, there is a considerable reduction. Okay, since only a single leaf is growing in one season in some orchid plants, and leaves in some other plants may be fleshy and leathery. And for example, here in this particular plant, Dischidia numulana and Platycecum, and also Asplenium dinus leaves, they are modified into the pictures. Okay, so some plants, some epiphytes such as orchids, they develop a considerably reduction in leaf number. Some other orchids, they may have fleshy and leathery leaves, and some species, some epiphytes, their leaves are modified into pitchers. Now this Chidia Normulana, it is an epiphytic species of the family Asclepidaceae, and this plant, it grows very commonly in the Sundarban areas, and it shows a peculiar types of leaf pitchers. Okay, so the pitchers, they have openings through which the adventitious roots. Okay, as you can see, the leaves of this particular epiphytic plant, that is this Chidia, the leaves, they are in the form of, they are modified into pitchers. Okay, you must have seen the pitcher plant, how the petioles and the leaf blade, they are modified into a receptacle. It's like a container inside. So these pitchers, they have openings through which the adventitious roots can enter inside, and the roots branch copiously into a number of very delicate rootlets which spread on the entire inner surface of the pitcher. And you can see here these delicate rootlets, okay, small rootlets, they spread on the entire inner surface of the pitcher, and they form a network. So the inner surface of the pitcher is also coated with wax, and these modified leaves or the pitcher, they collect and accumulate rainwater, humus, and minerals that are absorbed by the root network. So that root network is formed inside the pitcher. Okay, and this root network, it helped in the accumulation, it collects and accumulates the rainwater, the humus, as well as the minerals which can be used by the plant. So these you can see that how the leaves of the epiphytes are modified into pitchers. Sometimes even the ants and the insects, they enter the cavity of the pitcher, because that pitcher, okay, that modified leaf, it's like a container where there is a cavity inside. So sometimes these insects, they enter inside the cavity through a hole where they may be killed and digested. Okay, so these insects sometimes you will find even in the pitcher plant, inside the pitcher plant, you will find these insects which have been killed. So the dead remains of these insects, they serve as a nitrogen source for the plants. And this myrmecophily, which is a sort of symbiotic association. If you remember, girls, I had discussed on this symbiotic association. It means the relationship between the plant and the insect. Okay, where they, just like in your fourth semester when you study the microorganisms such as bacteria and fungi, they form a symbiotic relationship with the roots, meaning they obtain nutrients from the roots and in turn they help the roots to absorb the nutrients and other requirements from the soil. So in this way they have a relationship of give and take. Okay, so the between the roots and the organisms. But here this symbiotic relationship or symbiotic association is between the insect and the plant is referred to as the myrmecophily. Okay, so it is a kind of symbiotic relationship between the insect and the plant. So this type, it is of very common occurrence in the epiphytic plants, and in the family of Bromeaceae, some species they develop spoon-like leaves in rosettes. Okay, so there are spoon-like leaves, and these leaves, why they look like spoons, this is because in order to collect and store the rainwater, which is finally absorbed by the epidermal hairs present on the concave surface of the leaves. So just like this, no, just like a spoon. So in this concave surface area of the leaf, they will collect the rainwater, which will then finally be absorbed by the epidermal hairs present on this leaf. Because as you know that these plants, their roots, they are not rooted to the soil, their roots are not uh, penetrating the soil, so the roots, they cannot function the absorption of water and nutrients from the soil. So that is why for absorption of water, the leaves, these spoon like leaves, they help in storing and collecting the rainwater which will be absorbed by the plant. So these are the morphological adaptations, where we have seen that the roots, they are of three types. Then we have the stem, which are succulent stem, okay, which are fleshy, and some are like bulbous or tuberous, become bulbous or tuberous, and the leaves, okay, the leaves which are fleshy and leathery, and also pitcher leaves which are present in these epiphytic plants. Now coming to the fourth type of adaptation, morphological adaptation, is fruits, seeds, as well as dispersal. Now the fruits and seeds, they are usually dispersed by either wind, insects, and also by the birds. Now when the seeds, they reach the suitable surface and they get a favorable environment, they will germinate over there and they will give rise to a new independent epiphyte. So how the epiphytes, how the fruits and the seeds, they disperse from one place to another is through the help of these three: the wind, insect, and through the help of the birds. So they, in this way, they disperse from one place to another, and when they reach the suitable host and on the favorable environmental condition, they will germinate and they will give rise into a new independent epiphyte. Here in this figure you can see the leaf pitchers. You can see it's like a container, right? It's a picture of this Chidia plant, and the right one is the, when you cut open this picture longitudinally, you can see here inside it is a network of the roots, okay, and this network of root is present inside in order to collect the water and other nutrients. So these are some of the morphological features or adaptations of the epiphytic plants. So next we come to the next adaptive features, that is the anatomical adaptation in the epiphytic plants. Now The first is the presence of thick cuticle as well as the sunken stomata. So in the epiphytic plants, this cuticle is very thick, just like in case of xerophytic plants we have studied. These two structures greatly reduce the loss of water from the plants. Remember, just like in xerophyte, so this is one of the xerophytic character that can be seen in epiphyte, because even in xerophyte, because they have to grow in those areas where there is less water, so they have to prevent the loss of water. So they have thick cuticle as well as the sunken stomata. Now, generally, the surface cells of water absorbing organs, such as the roots as well as some leaves, they are not cuticularized. Okay, they are not the surface of some cells of water absorbing organs are not cuticularized, meaning they don't have a cuticle. They are not covered with a cuticle. Whereas in some other organs of the plant, there is a presence of very thick cuticle in order to prevent the loss of water. But the roots and the leaves, as they need to absorb more water, so they are not cuticularized. And in succulent epiphytes, thin-walled parenchymatous tissue that store water, it develop extensively. Okay, so in case of these succulent epiphytes, uh, parenchymatous tissue can be seen, which help in excessive storage of water. And the third one here, the aerial hanging roots. Remember those hanging roots of many tropical epiphytes belonging to the family Eraceae and Orchidaceae. Okay, belonging to these two families, Eraceae and Orchidaceae, develop on the surface a characteristic greenish white thin walled massive tissue. Okay, so remember I had we had discussed just recently in the first video, I think so, when we discussed about the morphological adaptation of the roots. If you remember that these hanging roots, they are greenish in color. They are greenish in color and they can take part in photosynthesis. So these roots, especially belonging to the family of Eraceae and Orchidaceae, you can see on the surface of the roots there is a greenish white thin walled massive tissue, and this tissue is referred to as a velamen. Okay, so a velamen is a hygroscopic tissue that rapidly absorbs moisture from the saturated atmosphere like a sponge. Okay, so this velamen, as you can see here in this diagram, they are nothing but they are spongy tissues. Okay, these spongy tissues, they it is a multiple layered epidermis. You can see here in this figure, it is a multi-layered epidermis known as a velamen, and it consists of non-living compact cells. And these cells, they provide support, they prevent the water loss, and they assist the plant in absorption of water. Okay, its cells are empty, so the cells of the velamen, they are empty, that is dead, and the cell wall shows spiral or reticulate thickenings. So there are reticulate thickenings on their walls, and just inner to the velamen there is present a peculiar layer called the exodermis. You can see in this figure, just below the velamen there is another layer, that is the exodermis. So you can see the fibrous thickenings of the in the velamen, and just below there is an exodermis. So what is the function of this velamen tissue or the spongy tissue? It is to provide support to the cell, to prevent the water loss, and to assist the plant in absorbing water. So these are some of the anatomical characteristic features of the epiphytic plant. You can see this exodermal cells, they are of two types. The first type is the lignified and thick walled cells, and the second type is the thin walled cells or passage cells. Why they are referred to as passage cells? Because the walls of which are permeable to water. The water can pass through, and the filament it absorb and retain moisture till that it absorbed by passage cell of the exodermis. So it can absorb water and it can retain the moisture through the help of the passage cells of the exodermis. So in this exodermis that you can see here in this figure, there are two types of cells. The first type is the lignified and thick walled cells, and the other type is the cells, the permeable cells, which are permeable to water. And other structures can be seen in the epiphytes, which are similar to those found in the mesophytic plants. So these are some of the anatomical features. This is same thing, this figure here, you can see the filament just below the epidermis, and just below the filament there present an exodermis through which water can pass. Okay, coming to the last part, that is physiological adaptations. Now, in epiphytes as well, there are numerous eco-physiological adaptation. Here, since we are studying about the ecological adaptations, but now we are talking about the physiology. Okay, the physiology or the physiological adaptations in the plants that appear to contribute to epiphyte success in the canopy. Okay, the canopy, that is the uppermost branches of the tree in a forest. So in a forest you will find that these epiphytes are growing even in the forest, that is on the uppermost branches of the trees, forming a more or less continuous layer of leaves. Okay, so in the canopy, these epiphytes, they show numerous physiological adaptations, and these epiphytes, they often grow in the canopy of very wet tropical forests with abundant precipitation. You can see here, with abundant precipitation, sorry, and high soil water availability. All right, so these epiphytes, they often grow in the canopies of very wet tropical forests with abundant precipitation as well as high soil water availability. But even in such humid forests, you can see this line here, even in such humid forests, what happened, the canopy, it can dry out quickly, and therefore it has been described as the desert in the rainforest, because you know that in the desert there is very less availability of water, right? So even in the canopies where these epiphytes grow, it has been described as the desert in the rainforest. Why? Because the the canopy can dry out quickly. Okay, so many epiphytic plant, you can see that they use this CAM cycle. It is one of the three metabolic pathways found in vascular plants for the assimilation of atmospheric carbon dioxide. All right, for the this CAM pathways is for the assimilation of the carbon dioxide, atmospheric carbon dioxide. Now this plants which has this, which show this CAM pathway, okay, the CAM plants, they take up the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere predominantly at night, improving the ability of plants to acquire carbon in the water limited and carbon dioxide limited environments. So these plants, they usually take up the atmospheric carbon dioxide at night. Thereby, they improve the ability of the plants to acquire carbon in water limited as well as carbon dioxide limited environments. So here you can see the name of these people, which these are the people which observe this in these in these epiphytic plants. Okay, they study the how these plants, they take up the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, especially at night, and they improve the ability of plants to get or to acquire carbon even in the environment where there is a water limitation as well as carbon dioxide limitation. So this is according to the study of these two people, Winter and Smith. Now, in epiphytic plants, even the thick leaf cuticles are also observed. In many epiphyte species, they have thick cuticles to prevent the water loss, and also they exhibit less negative osmotic potential compared to their terrestrial congeners. Okay, meaning compared to other epiphytic plants, these epiphytic species they exhibit less negative osmotic potential. You know that, for example, in a solute, in a solution, you know that it contains solute, right? Suppose in a solution of salt and water, when you mix the salt and water, that is referred to as a solution, right? So in a solution where there are solutes, the the less water will flow out from the solvent to the environment, whereas in a pure water, where there is only pure water, the water can move from a from a solvent to the environment. So you know that water, it always flow from a less solute concentration environment to a it flows from the environment which has a high solute concentration, a low solute concentration to a high solute concentration. So here these epiphytic plants, they exhibit less negative osmotic potential compared to other epiphytic plant. In this way, consistent meaning it is done over time, okay, with careful management of the internal water resource. So for a longer period of time, these epiphytic species, they exhibit a less negative osmotic potential compared to their terrestrial congeners, meaning terrestrial epiphytic plants. And finally, varying degrees of tolerance to shade as well as desiccation. Here desiccation, it means the removal of moisture. Okay, so they can tolerate uh, they have a varying degrees of tolerance. Okay, they can tolerate shade as well as desiccation, meaning the removal of moisture. This properties have been observed in epiphytes compared to other terrestrial species, to other related terrestrial species. And these characteristics, which these epiphytes they have these characteristic, it allow them to survive a long period of drought stress, especially in the tropical forests with prolonged dry season. So these epiphytes which grow in the canopies of the in the forest of the tropical forest, they usually uh, go through this drought stress, okay, because these canopies, as I had mentioned, that they can dry out quickly. So in order to survive in that drought condition, in that dry environment, these epiphyte, they show a high degree of varying degrees of tolerance to shade as well as to this dryness or desiccation. All right, how they exhibit a less negative osmotic potential, then they have thick leaf cuticles which prevent the flow of the which prevent the loss of water, and also they show this they use this cam cycle, okay, for taking up for assimilation of the atmospheric carbon dioxide, and they usually take up the carbon dioxide at night. Thereby they improve the ability of plants to get the carbon, and in this environment which is very dry, where there is only a little amount of water and a limited amount of carbon dioxide. So these are some of the physiological adaptation in the epiphytic plants.